Let me introduce, number one, Jean Arthuis, who is chairman of the Budget Committee at the European Parliament. Welcome to you. Number two, Ariel Brunner, who is the senior head of policy for Europe and Central Asia at BirdLife International. Number three, we have Arianna Lotti, who is an agricultural entrepreneur and a managing partner at Tenuta San Carlo. Number four, we have Philipp Schulze-Esking, who is a member of the board and vice president of the German Agricultural Society. So, welcome all of you, and also in your general applause, please give a warm welcome to our first keynote speaker, that is EU Commissioner for Agriculture and Rural Development, Phil Hogan. So, Commissioner Hogan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm happy to be back here again at the FFA, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to share with you the work that is currently being undertaken regarding agriculture and rural development at the Commission. And when I spoke at this gathering last year, I stated quite plainly that as an environmental policy, the CAP is making a contribution, but I also acknowledge that it can do better. I made the point that in positioning itself as the global leader in climate and environmental action, the European Union was acknowledging that we need to move beyond rhetoric and platitudes and focus on reality and action, including in food and agricultural policy. So now we're a year on, and I'm pleased to say that we are delivering on that promise. We're in the final stages of developing a plan to bring European farming and food production fully and firmly into the 21st century, placing it at the heart of our international commitments on climate and sustainability. And by devising a new system based on clear targets and performance measurement, agriculture and rural communities can assume a greater leadership role in our overall sustainability agenda. And today's panel discussion, as the Chairman has said, is asking the question, could European agriculture survive without the CAP? Now, in my view, the real question here is, and we need to ask, is does the CAP provide the right policy framework to support all of the political and societal demands that we make of our farmers in 2018? And if not, what are the changes that we should introduce to make sure that it does? Now, the CAP already seeks to guarantee safe, affordable, high-quality food for our people, produced to the highest standards. And we must never take this for granted, even though many people do. And we must remember that this can only remain the case if farmers are making a living from the work that they do. So if we want to maintain food security and the highest food standards in the world, we have to support farmers through various policies. Meanwhile, we also have an abundance of evidence in relation to the shortcomings of the current CAP. The recent Court of Auditors report argues that the current green architecture of the policy should be replaced by a more ambitious approach. And this is what we intend to do. Our people also want to see more bang for their buck. This month's Eurobarometer survey indicates that the majority of people believe farmers need direct income support to maintain European food security, while agricultural policy should deliver more benefits for environment and climate. And our very broad public consultation process, which we carried out last year, highlighted the overlapping societal expectations regarding food, in particular concerning food safety, food quality, environmental and animal welfare standards. And we have to plan to address these challenges in a more integrated way than we have done in the past, in a more simple way and results-driven way in a future CAP. So I want to make it very clear that the Commission has been proactive and energetic in trying to make as many changes as possible in the meantime in the current programming period. We have simplified the policy significantly. We've improved risk management tools. We've established clearer rules governing intervention in the marketplace, more flexibility for member states to support specific sectors of economic, social or environmental importance. And next month we will be proposing legislation outlining certain unfair trading practices with a view to strengthening the position of the farmer in the European food chain. Looking beyond 2020, we cannot afford to be woolly-headed in our thinking. The truth is that agricultural production will always be connected with certain levels of emissions. However, we can make huge progress, in my view, if we ruthlessly focus on smart ways to lower them. Simply scaling down production to reduce emissions is not the right option. especially in times of growing global food demand. Measures that mitigate climate and increase resilience without undermining production potential should therefore be prioritised and encouraged. The role of new technologies, the role of precision agriculture, all of these are central to delivering a win-win outcome. The right policy support will allow for economic as well as social and environmental gains. Farmers, particularly the younger generation, must see an attractive and a rewarding career. Otherwise, who is going to do this work on behalf of our citizens if we can't attract young people? Protecting the livelihoods of farmers is written into the founding treaty of the European Union, and that core principle remains as valid today as ever before. Nobody is looking for a treaty change in any event. The World Bank has recently carried out an assessment of the Common Agricultural Policy and has confirmed that the policy plays an important role in the creation of better jobs for farmers across the European Union. Now, according to the World Bank, structural transformation is well underway and relatively successful. The gap between agricultural incomes and other incomes is closing and converging right across the European Union. And the positive impact of decoupled support is increasing productivity and structural adjustment. The CAP is supporting the creation of a large number of jobs in the agricultural sector and seeking to reduce poverty in rural areas. And sustainability is not just a question of the environment. We have to, of course, ensure that we have the sustainability of our farmer as well. So this is a good foundation upon which to generate further social goods. And by guaranteeing farmers' ability to make a decent living, we rely on them for our food security, our food safety, the maintenance of our rural areas, and now increasingly to help preserve climate, environment, and precious biodiversity. But we have to allow for constructive criticism of this policy, because some aspects of the current CAP are not working, including the greening provisions. All of the people on the 2011 reform, 2013, said that this was the way to go in relation to delivering on environmental obligations. They now have changed their mind and they believe it's the wrong way to go. But this doesn't help in terms of predictability, stability of a policy. So climate and environment action depends on results, hard measurable numbers in relation to carbon emissions, biodiversity, soil, water, and air and water quality. So we are going to propose a new delivery model which places performance and results at the centre of the policy rather than actually rules and compliance. This is fully in keeping with the Juncker Commission's unyielding commitment to deliver more results and more value added at EU level for the people in relation to our policy. So we're going to develop a new green architecture which will replace the current one and reflect the lessons overall. The CAP as a whole will be centred on a single streamlined CAP strategic plan for both pillars. Environment and climate objectives, as well as the other crucial building blocks of the green architecture, will be set at EU level, but flexibility and implementation for delivery of those objectives will be more at member state and regional level. Brussels does not need to measure the width and length of hedges. What we need is to measure is soil erosion, water quality, species and biodiversity patterns, nutrient and carbon emissions and removals. Are we making progress on all of these areas? So our EU headline objectives will combine a common base of rules, will tie all farmers' income support to the environment and climate-friendly farming practices. This will take some features from the current systems of cross-compliance and greening, which it replaces. Secondly, voluntary approaches in both pillars will allow member states to tailor entry-level environment and climate measures best suited to the local conditions. We need to analyse the national environmental and climate needs and conditions. We need to devise a mixture of mandatory and voluntary measures in both pillars, such as entry-level eco-schemes plus more targeted agri-environment and climate measures. We're exploring the introduction of nutrient management plans and incentives for precision agriculture, and include adequate and specific environment and climate targets in the overall national CAP strategic plans, which will allow for clear performance assessment. This is the new system and the new ideas behind it, and bring a multitude of clear advantages in my view. Both mandatory and voluntary approaches would be maintained, but they'll be based on less prescriptive and less detailed provisions at EU level and allow for important simplifications. And there will be better results, in my view, through this mechanism of planning. This is not renationalisation of the CAP. Giving member states more flexibility in a way to design measures that are appropriate to that particular member state does not mean that we're going to abandon the policy to the member states. It'll be harmonised and structured in such a way that it'll be policy at EU level and flexibility about implementation at member state level. The European Commission will remain the sole guarantor of the policy and the engine of our new delivery model, and all member state plans will require Commission approval. With increased levels of conditionality and clear boundaries, we will tie in the member states to ensure that they deliver on their part of the bargain for the first time. But we have to start applying more common sense to our policy making. As I said, the one-size-fits-all approach has failed to deliver. The Joint Research Centre can tell us the levels of soil erosion on a given parcel of land using satellite technology. So therefore, why do we need physical inspections in relation to our farmers' places? The new conditionality entry-level schemes, other eco schemes, and our more ambitious Pillar 2 agri-environment climate measures can achieve a great deal, but they must be complemented by various other types of policy interventions. For example, we need support for advice and training, for investments, for various forms of cooperation, and the pursuit of research and innovation. So the CAP will continue to offer support in all of these areas in our Pillar 2 investments. So, ladies and gentlemen, you've seen in a short few minutes the package by which we're going to present and the principles around it at the end of May. Encouraging and enhancing carbon sequestration and the development of bioeconomy is also important for our rural areas and our whole economy. So it's essential to ensure that even though the mitigation potential of agriculture is not regarded high, that the mitigation contribution of agriculture will not lag behind other sectors. Incentivizing additional carbon sequestration through agriculture and farming will therefore be one of the very important overarching components for the future CAP. We must implement our international agreements, and agriculture must play its part. So in conclusion, Mr. Chairman, I ask once more the question governing today's panel discussion: do we need a common agricultural policy? And of course, you would expect me, but I genuinely believe we do. We need our farmers and our agribusiness to be involved in the delivery not just of food security, but also of a modern, smart and sustainable landscapes and society for all of us in terms of public goods. Our farmers are essential to meeting our societal objectives. They should be seen as part of the solution, not part of the problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Hogan. Do take a seat. Perhaps not the most surprising conclusion that the Agriculture Commissioner believes there is still a need for the Common Agricultural Policy. I suspect there are lots of questions for the Commissioner in the room, so do keep them in your mind, because there will be an opportunity to raise your hands and ask them, or indeed use the hashtag and get them to us on Twitter, on social media. So all that to look forward to, and I'm sure Commissioner Hogan can't wait for the Q&A. But before we get there, we've got other speakers to hear from. So if you wouldn't mind, Jean Arthuis, if you take the opportunity to give us your thoughts on this question about the future of the CAP.
Good afternoon to all of you, and many thanks for your invitation. The Common Agricultural Policy remains one of the pillars of the European construction. It aims at ensuring food sovereignty and security for citizens, and is one of the leverages for economic dynamism in rural areas. Two questions are raised. What will be the amount of appropriations which will be granted in the next post-2020 multi-annual financial framework? Will the CAP-related mechanisms be adapted to the challenges that farmers are facing? As far as the appropriations are concerned, the UK withdrawal, which will probably be effective from 1st January 2021 onwards, will raise some concerns, as it means that a gross contribution of around 14 billion euros will miss to the annual budget. However, Europe has to respond to new expectations. Globalization has resulted in new threats and challenges which EU member states cannot take on alone at national level. Some progress has to be undertaken in the fields of defense and security, fight against globalized terrorism, climate protection, massive migrations, digital economy, and cyber attacks. It is obvious that a budget limited to 1% of the EU GDP would lead to radical choices. The funds granted to the CAP would inevitably be lowered. We are waiting for the release of the European Commission's proposal on the next MFF on the 2nd of May. During his speech on the State of the Union in September, President Jean-Claude Juncker mentioned the number of 1.2%. This would barely offset the loss of the British contribution. For its part, the European Parliament has just voted an initiative report calling for 1.3% of GDP and the maintenance of the same appropriations level for the CAP. We already know that some member states are keen to make an effort and others want to stick to 1%. The debate is open. In any case, we have to wait for the outcome of the negotiations between the EU and the UK. If the latter wishes to maintain a cooperation with Europe, it will have to pay for, like Switzerland and Norway, which significantly contribute to the EU budget in order to have access to the single market and participate to several European programs. The second issue concerns the content and the mechanisms related to the CAP. It has to be admitted that rules have become so complex that those concerned consider they are far beyond their understanding. Moreover, the redistribution principle quantified by country makes it even trickier to understand. Eventually, during recent crises, the limits came out due to the lack of appropriate means. Overall, we have to ensure farms' competitiveness and protect the climate and the environment at the same time. Therefore, it is clear that research and the innovation have to be stimulated. The removal of some phytosanitary products is worth considering only if there is a development of substitutes in compliance with our instructions. Furthermore, the deterioration of climates increases the risk linked to the bad weather and natural disasters. Likewise, the price volatility implies a need for stabilization measures in order to maintain farmers' revenues. It is therefore important to pay attention to the building of financial reserves for crises, derogating from the budgetary principle of annuality. A support to an insurance system could be triggered as a complement. In any case, the European Parliament will contribute to the building of a clear political framework destined to preserve a common agricultural ambition at the European level through the Dorfman report. The European Commission will deliver its proposal at the end of May. The political ambition and the feasibility of the programs will be revealed through the level of the allocated appropriations. My concern is that everyone finally opts for continuity and the business as usual principle. Whatever will be the answers to both questions I raised, it is important to keep in mind that the market is European. Therefore, the competition has to be fair and the rules enacted should be applied and respected everywhere with the same impartiality and precision. The perspective of a renationalization scenario would impede this evidence. A sustainable and ambitious CAP is absolutely essential. It is even more necessary as the agricultural sector lives a true revolution. The common agriculture policy can display this role model. Yes, Europe is a strength for our cultural diversity. No, the CAP does not favor the standardization as some would like to make the others believe. On the contrary, it makes real our dream of a Europe where everyone can coexist on the same market. with the solidarity necessary for an equilibrium between our territories. The economic models are changing. The agronomical knowledge has never been such extended and has never grown so rapidly. From one farm to another, the level of technology, the ability to integrate the innovations or join new economic models strongly differ. We need a new agricultural ambition at the level of our continent in order to bring our farmers on the path of excellence and accompany them in the changes undertaken at the quest for economically sustainable solutions. Let's make our support the economic and environmental excellence through the CAP. It is a trust contract between the agricultural sector and the European citizens. Let's accept to pay the price for it. Our common future depends from it. By way of conclusion, I would like to underline that the CAP is not only a bulk of budgetary appropriations. The farmers' income also depends from trade policy and competition law. It is useless to grant subsidies to beef farmers if cheap imports bankrupt them. The negotiation of free trade agreement should be defined by a strategic vision, and the agriculture cannot become the adjusting variable. Concerning the competition rules, the omnibus recently approved is a very much appreciated step forward. It is indeed needed to allow farmers gathering in order to define their own business strategy and get back a power of negotiation in their relations with converters and distributors. There is then a consistently requirement which implies a simplification without which we waste a lot of energy and money during the administrative and control procedures. We finally have to confirm, while bearing in mind the diversity of countries and situations, that we have the same vision for the Europe of tomorrow. A Europe which shapes our future, a Europe which helps us to structure and protect our sectors, a Europe which takes care of its food sovereignty and security, a Europe which supports the economic dynamism and the social cohesion within its territories as a whole. Thank you for your attention.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Jean. Okay, well, we've had our two sort of keynote presentations from two European politicians, albeit obviously from different institutions. Jean speaking, of course, as a European parliamentarian, and Commissioner Hogan speaking, obviously, on behalf of the Commission. But I think it's fair to say that the two of them reaching a conclusion which I guess none of us are going to be hugely surprised by, which is that the CAP is absolutely essential, not just to the future of farmers in Europe, but to the well-being of all European citizenry. I'm struck by some things we didn't hear. We didn't hear Commissioner Hogan talk about the money at all. Jean did, and talked about the really difficult budgetary situation with Brexit and all of that. Commissioner Hogan, you didn't really go into that at all. You didn't even use the word subsidies once. So whether we're actually coming to an end of the era of subsidies or not, I'm not entirely sure. So we'll pick away at all of that, but I'm just airing some thoughts right now because I want to get our other three contributors involved. Now, they're not going to make keynote speeches, but I want them just to reflect on what we've heard so far, and each of you three just tell me whether you are hearing things that make you feel this discussion about the future of the CAP is going in the right direction. So if we can start with you, Ariel Brunner. You're the Senior Head of Policy for Europe and Asia at BirdLife International. So you obviously, with regard to this conversation, coming at it from the point of view of somebody who's involved in environmental protection. What do you make of what you're hearing?
Not much.
If I can characterize that, it was a heavy sigh.
No, it's all very generic and very nice, and we all agree that we need a policy, and Europe can do good. I'm missing a few crucial things. I'm missing the sort of honest analysis of the real problems we have. Biodiversity is in free fall. We have huge problem with soil fertility. Climate change risk wiping out farming in the whole belt of Europe.
Is it?
Yeah.
Wiping it out?
Places like Spain will have hardly any water under most scenarios. So we are looking at some very frightening things and saying the CAP has contributed so much, it can do more, is not the sort of robust science analysis you need. Because if you don't admit you have a problem, you're not going to solve it. The second thing that I'm not hearing is very specific objectives. So are we going to take, for example, a pot of the current money and dedicate it to real biodiversity measures so that we can help farmers bring back the biodiversity which we've heard across the day that it's good for the farmers, good for the citizens, good for everyone? Or are we going to leave it all hanging in the air? And then what I do here is a lot of talk about subsidiarity. Now, that's fine.
For those who hate jargon,
yeah,
the
that's
implication
about
would be
power
that
to the member states.
more of the powers of implementing the CAP lie in the member states. Yeah.
Which can go right if the objectives are clear and the accountability mechanisms are serious, meaning that the Commission is able to say no and is able to claim the money back if the objectives are not honestly pursued. Otherwise, what we'll see is what has happened with the greening. Now, it's not that we like the greening and now we don't like it anymore. So to be very, very simple about it, the greening was supposed to be paying farmers for things like the flower strips that we've heard farmers do, and it makes sense, and so on. After, I'm afraid, the Comagri and the agriculture ministers have finished working with it, they've built so many loopholes and creative accountings and alternatives and equivalencies that nobody, starting with the farmers, understand what it is about. And most of the ecological focus areas are not flower strips that are good for the bees and the butterflies and the birds, but they are things like soy fields, which frankly have no meaning for biodiversity. Now, if we give more power to the member states, it really risks becoming, give the money, and you'll never see it coming back, and it will bring potentially an implosion of the whole system.
But just to be clear, on this one point, when Commissioner Hogan said, and I think I'm quoting him directly, or pretty much directly, he said the green provisions in the CAP as last formulated have failed. And not the way to go, i.e. there's going to have to be fundamental rethink. Do you agree with that at least?
Yes, but we need to look at why they have failed. Now, Commissioner Hogan, to his credit, has fought to at least exclude the use of pesticides from ecological focus areas, which, you know, has been a sort of symbolic fight, and he has taken a lot of flack from member states and members of the parliament because of it. The farm lobby, it is very clear, the intensive farm lobby does not want to see change on the ground. What we've heard today, across the day, is that we need to help farmers change and do the change that they must do. So the question is, are we going to see a cap for change or a cap for business as usual? For the moment, I see huge political pressure from the agri-lobby to make sure that the same money goes to the same people doing the same things. If that's the outcome, it would be terrible for all of us, starting with European farmers.
Right. Well, when we get to discussion of the CAP, so often it's mind-bendingly complicated, and you've just given us a way of looking at it that is actually fairly straightforward. So let's run with that for a little while. And if I may, I'm going to turn to you, Ariana. You're described as an agricultural entrepreneur. So give us 20 seconds of explanation of exactly what kind of agricultural entrepreneur you are, and then perhaps address Ariel's basic point, you know, are we going to get a cap for change, which he says we must have, or are we going to just get a reformulation of a cap for business as usual? So off you go.
Off I go. Good afternoon. My name is Ariane Lotti, and I manage Tenuta San Carlo, which is a family farm that my grandparents purchased in the 1930s, and I moved back to manage the farm 4 years ago for 3 basic reasons. The first, market volatility. The model was, the farm for a long time was a conventional commodity farm that sold on global markets undifferentiated grain and was heavily subsidized by the EU. Markets have changed. Climate is also much more volatile, and we face huge climate risks. And then there was just the political changes. So I manage 480 hectares of land. I grow organic rice, organic grains, organic legumes. I have a small cattle herd that I raise for beef, and some pine forests and conservation land with a small agritourism. It's a multifunctional, diversified farm in the full sense of the word.
Can I interrupt you for just one second? I'm just so taken with Ariel saying, you know, parts of southern Europe are basically becoming unfarmable. Does that ring true to you in Italy?
Yes, so I was actually going to then tell the story of what happened last year, which is very much connected to something that Ariel said, because unfortunately in 2017 we had a perfect storm occur, specifically in my area. And as we think about the CAP and the future of the CAP, we need to both think about kind of a vision and a future of agriculture, but also think about years like 2017, which were almost catastrophic for us. So what happened was that I was at the end of the organic transition, which many of you know comes with higher costs. So I had anticipated higher costs for that year and lower income. But then what happened? The conventional commodity markets collapsed, right? So wheat prices dropped, rice prices went through the floor, and the crops that I had in the field were selling obviously below the costs of production. Then, in my area, we had drought. So I live, obviously, and farm in a Mediterranean area. We get very little rain every year, but the rain we do get is very important for crop production. And last year, between January and mid-October, we got 10 millimeters of rain, which meant that I had, even if we tried to irrigate, I had crop failure in the fields, fields that I just did not plant, and food that I did not produce. My hay production was a fifth of what it normally is. I didn't plant my millet crop. I hardly harvested chickpeas, and that is the scenario for my area, an increasingly drier climate, and that directly impacts my ability to produce food. And so yes, now I'm looking at a variety of different types of investments that will have to be made to the farm, and I'm changing my crop plan to meet climate variability challenges, but it's a process that takes years to implement at the farm level. And then the third kind of piece of that storm that was 2017 was that 100 hectares of my land have been enrolled in a CAP program, a conservation program for the past 20 years, where 20 years ago, the EU was paying farmers not to produce on marginal lands. And so I had to keep that land mowed once a year and keep it, generally maintained, but that subsidy ended last year. And so 100 hectares of land came back under agricultural management, and the income that would normally come from that conservation program had finished. And so what that means in years of crisis is that the CAP and CAP subsidies help essentially manage cash flow, help me pay salaries, and help a little bit, right? And so right now I am operating on a line of credit, even if I am trying to access new markets and reorganize the farm for those newer markets. But it is a reality of food production that sometimes you're going to have really bad years. And fortunately, my farm is diversified enough to be able to take a hit. But not everybody is.
Just to boil this right down to very brief overview stats, what percentage of your income right now comes from CAP subsidies?
Okay, so
just after
the conservation program?
Yeah, after it ended.
Yeah, okay, so after it ended, about 10%.
Okay. Is your message to the citizens of Europe, all the hundreds of millions of them, that in the next CAP, you still need significant CAP subsidies, and that they, the citizens of Europe, the vast, vast proportion of whom have nothing to do with agriculture at all, should continue to shell out as taxpayers to subsidize you?
I guess I would answer that question with another question, which is whether Europeans want European-grown food because while I do believe there should be subsidization of farms in terms of a partnership between the citizenry and its farmers, because there are compliance requirements, there are greening requirements, there are a whole set of requirements, but we're also producing food. And so the question is, I can't compete with Southeast Asia on rice production or Canada on wheat production in terms of the cost of production. And so I'm reorganizing the farm to be able to access higher value markets and get more value for every thing that I yield.
But the answer is yes. For you, absolutely yes. There is still a need and a public good in the subsidy system.
If Europeans want to eat European-grown food,
right.
Yes.
Okay, good. Let's just get that out there. That's important. All right, Philipp, I'm going to invite you to take part now. You are Philipp Schulze-Esking, ladies and gentlemen. He's a member of the board and vice president of the German Agricultural Society. You're a farmer yourself, Philipp.
Yeah.
Pig farmer?
Right.
Yeah. Here's a thought for you. Nobody yet has really engaged in the future of the CAP in the degree to which there needs to be a recognition that there's a difference between East and West Europe here, and that West European producers have taken advantage of the monies that have been provided through the CAP for a long time, indeed for generations. And maybe there needs to be a recognition, a bit like in the climate change debate, there needs to be a recognition of where the original pollution has come from and how the emerging economies shouldn't be asked to pay for the misdeeds, or if you want to put it that way, the pollution of the first world. Equally in farming, maybe there needs to be more of a focus on helping the newer entrants into the European Union who've had less time to take advantage of the CAP in previous years, and actually withdraw some of the advantages of the CAP from the traditional beneficiaries in Western Europe, which would be people like you, frankly, in Germany. Do you buy that at all?
Well, let me state first that we have a common market, and maybe we have also common goal, and that is, as we are also talking about the future of agriculture here, from my point of view, what's really most important for the future of agriculture is to have the acceptance of the society about what we are doing. And if you follow the discussions lately in Germany and maybe in other countries as well about, for instance, glyphosate or GMO, animal welfare, all that, we really have to emphasize on that goal. And to achieve that goal, for me, it is important to become more sustainable, and that goes for every country in our common European market. And for that, if we are talking about the CAP now, it is important that policy sets new incentives for the farmers, because from my point of view, it's not really motivating just to leave a strip alongside a field and plant flowers on it. That might contribute to sustainability in one area, but as we have a really broad landscape of different farming and farm situations, it might be totally counterproductive in another area. So what's really missing is we need real indicators to measure sustainability, and that would not only help the farmers to find the right decision, no matter what area he is working in, it will also make it maybe more transparent for the society to see what we are doing and for what we are paying money. So, and to put it down to practice, I could imagine to have a setup of indicators that are measurable on farm side. And why not saying that if we have a credit point system well, you have to reach a certain level to get a basic payment, and maybe you can add a few top-ons to get extra payment. And then, every farmer in every certain area can decide maybe what tools out of a big basket he can pick to become more sustainable. And then I would say we would really get on the right track in every single European country.
But okay, so in essence, you're not really interested in drawing distinctions between sort of older and newer member states.
Well, we are talking about the future here, not about the past.
Okay, well, I wonder if any delegates here from Eastern European member nations might not quite agree with that analysis. But nonetheless, what I'm not really hearing much of is any of you addressing Jean's point from the very beginning, which I thought was very honest and important. That is, there's a real money problem here. I don't want to bring it back to the UK. God knows we've got our own private grief about Brexit. But the fact is, the UK was a pretty serious contributor to the EU budget, and after 2020 it won't be. And other member states are talking about needing to, an era of austerity in terms of the EU's overall budget. So frankly, the outlook for the cap going forward is of a real squeeze on expenditure. That's the reality. So, you're going to have to live within tighter means going forward, and I'm not sure that any of you have really addressed that very much.
I'm happy to address that.
Go on then.
Yeah, and I think that is a clear message that's being sent, that I think everybody in a more resource-scarce world, whether it's in agriculture or in other sectors, has to try to do more with less. I think what oftentimes is missing from that, though, is a real recognition then of what the consequences and of what the loss is, because what that eventually means is that you have fewer people on the land, you have fewer people farming, you have fewer people in rural areas, you have fewer jobs in those rural areas, and it really gets then to the core of what you believe the role of policy to be. And that's why food policy is always so complex, right? Because we're talking about a core survival thing of society. And so, yes, I as a business am trying to reorganize and restructure my business to be able to operate with fewer subsidies, because I no longer have that conservation subsidy. The subsidies are diminishing. It's not that I'm just sitting back and twiddling my thumbs, but the reality of what that means. And restructuring is often a euphemism, I think we all know, for obviously laying off people, right? And that means fewer jobs. So it's a question of what the overall objectives are.
It is. It's all about priorities and what Europe as a whole regards as important, and where agriculture and rural communities sit in that. Okay, let's get to questions that don't come from me. I want all of you to raise your hands very soon, but there's just a couple of really important ones, and I think Commissioner Hogan needs to be quizzed on some of these. This one from the live stream for the Commissioner. Considering all the talk, and we've heard a lot of it today, about the benefits of small-scale farming, what will the cap in the future do to redirect the 80% of direct payments that currently go to just 20% of farmers?
Well, first of all, Stephen, that's a very simplistic figure, because if it's an area-based payment, if 80% of the land is in the hands of 20% of the farmers, clearly you're going to have 80% of the payments following that situation.
Yeah, well, so it's a support system that yes, massively is in the benefit of large landowners.
Yes, because
and you're happy with that.
I'm not happy with that, because this is what I said in my communication on the 29th of November, which clearly very few have read, from what I heard to say. A lot of talking has been done, as you rightly point out, but very few has read this document, where I said clearly that there's going to be a fair distribution of payments on my agenda. We're going to be capping of the larger amounts of money that go to people, and it's going to be redistributed to the smaller and medium-sized farmer.
So what might the percentages be in the future then? If this 80% of direct payments currently go to 20% of farmers, how might that look in the new, no longer business as usual, just tweaking of the cap, but a thoroughly radical reform of the cap? How might those numbers change?
Well, we have options where we're going to put capping at a certain figure. I'm not announcing the budget today, or I'm not announcing the legislative proposal, if you don't mind.
Everybody's here expecting you are going to announce the budget today.
If you don't mind, I have to get the approval of the College of Commissioners first before you. But at the end of the day, I do agree with the sentiment and the proposition of the question, which is that we need to have a fair distribution.
Are you a tweaker or a revolutionary?
We'll have to wait and see. I evolve over time.
Well, give us a clue. I don't think revolutionaries evolve. They make, a fairly radical shift. So it sounds like you're a tweaker.
I don't want to frighten farmers. I don't want to frighten farmers in the room. They'd hate revolutions.
Well, yeah, but sometimes revolutions are necessary.
No, I agree that there needs to be a shift in the direction of protecting the incomes of small and medium-sized farmers more at a time when we have less money. And when we have less money, we have to have priorities, as you rightly point out. So the small and medium-sized farmers have to be protected, and that's what I intend to do.
Right. Arianna, are you feeling much reassured by the cuddly commissioner to your left?
Don't answer that.
Yeah, whenever I think it's always helpful to, I think that's my role here, to ground the policy discussion, you know, in an example of a farm, right? And so I, though, run a larger farm, which is a 480-hectare farm. So
it's not that large, but anyway, it's larger.
Not on UK style, no. Not on UK style.
But in my region it is, and so
fair point.
I think, you know, and at risk of maybe saying something that I shouldn't say, one of the questions, though, in that is implied there, too, though, is that we're talking about farmers who are actively farming, right? There's a question not only of the size of farm, but who's actually running the business and the farmer, him or herself, right? Because my job is to run my farm, and that's, you know, I say I'm an agricultural entrepreneur because I'm now certified as that in Italy to, you know, which is the Italian way of saying you are a full-time farmer, right? And so I therefore can access certain things, certain, you know, funding through the Rural Development Program, but there's a real question about who, not only how big a farm is, because a cost of production, while it can be, you know, amortized over a number of hectares, is still a cost of production per hectare. But there's a question of who.
Yes, indeed. All right, we've got loads to get through and not much time. So, panel, you've got to promise me, give really pithy, terse answers now. One more for you, Commissioner Hogan. How is it possible to say the CAP has created employment? The number of farmers has actually dramatically decreased for years and years.
Well, we have 44 million people employed directly and indirectly in agriculture, the largest employer in Europe. There is restructuring going on. It's becoming more competitive, and therefore there's going to be consolidation. Every year there's about an average of 3 or 4% of farmers leaving the land for various reasons. Retirements, it's a risky job. It's not as sexy as other walks of life where you get better paid for doing maybe less difficult work.
Will the new CAP aim as an objective, a specific objective, to expand agricultural and rural employment?
No, not possible to do it directly, because if you want to be competitive, you have to consolidate and restructure. But we will be looking at ways in which we have value-added and better value-added and more jobs in that direction, in the processing and in rural areas through the bioeconomy, for example, where we feel we can get a lot of more economic activity in that way.
All right. You're all asking some great questions on the live stream, so I'm going to just go through a couple more, then I'm going to get the hands up. For Jean, will the future CAP have a legally binding percentage of budget for forestry or climate change adaptation, in your opinion?
In my opinion, I think it would be reasonable. We need a crisis reserve. Right now, we have quite nothing. It's very symbolic. The problem is that we operate the budget on a yearly basis. It would be necessary to constitute a reserve for crisis, and probably to permit a contribution to an insurance system, because we have to face the volatility of prices. And this is a question. The deterioration of climates is a source of natural disasters, and we have to prepare the refunding of the farmers which are in such situation. We have to compensate the losses due to natural disasters.
You know, you're a very senior parliamentarian. When Ariel says, you know, what we need is a CAP for real change, but what he fears we're going to get is a CAP for business as usual, what do you think?
I think we have to promote competition. This is a single market. What is very uneasy is that, in fact, 55 to 80% of the European budget is redistributed to member states through two channels, cohesion funds and CAP. And it's uneasy to reconcile the share for each member state with the priorities as defined for CAP. This is I am waiting the intelligent contribution of the commissioner.
You're waiting for
what I think, for example, if
you mean you haven't heard an intelligent contribution today?
If we forbid some products, chemical products,
yeah,
we have to make sure that we have substitutes. So I would suggest to invest a portion of the CAP in research.
All right. One more, and then we're going to keep promising. I want the hands up, but just very quickly, Philip, one for you, because you haven't had one. Do you agree with scientists and agencies across the globe, and you, of course, speak as a pig farmer, that the West must urgently act to reduce production and consumption of animal products in order to mitigate the harmful effects of animal production on our health and environment? And should that be incorporated, that priority, in the next CAP?
Well, basically, I don't like to tell people what they should do and should not do. I mean, as an entrepreneur, I try to produce what the market demands. So I don't know if...
No, but I mean, in all sorts of different areas, you know, we learn about the damaging, deleterious effects of things, and then we regulate to try and ensure the public good is represented by stopping them happening. And if we decide that animal production and consumption at present levels is doing real harms to the public good, we got to stop doing it.
Yeah, well, that would have been the second part of my answer, but of course, there's still a huge potential in becoming more sustainable, especially in animal production. And what shouldn't happen is that we have really huge external costs that are not, implemented in the cost of the product. That is important. But this actually, looking at the legislation and the legal framework we have right now here in Europe or in Germany, this I don't see, especially in pig production right now. So
right. Sorry, you're saying you're happy with the status quo in pig production, or you think?
Well, I see the problem that we have, and as I said, I see the potentials and the way that still we have to go.
Should Europe be producing fewer pigs and fewer cattle than it does today?
No, as long as we managed to have all the external cost of the production not paid by the society, but paid by the product, then why should the branch
pork and
reduce
beef should be just much more expensive?
Sorry?
So pork and beef should be more expensive?
Yeah, that's for sure.
Right, okay. Well, the consumers amongst us are going to have to think about that. Right, let's get some hands up. Oh, yes, right, we've got loads of hands up. I really feel a duty to go to the back, and I can see one at the back over there, and then one at the back, a lady at the back over there. Yes, ma'am, you put your hand up, and you, sir. So can we get microphones? Oh, what's happening? All the microphones are in the front. Why is this? Well, yeah, I'm going to come to the front, but I'm determined. Ma'am, you're at the back, and you're ready with a microphone. You go.
Hello, I am from Lithuania, and I think I will be the token Eastern European representative you wanted for, as regards to the direct payments issue. Because now in Lithuania, in Estonia, and Latvia, those subsidies for farmers are much lower than the European Union average. And it's exactly because we have a common market that is the problem. Because we have a common market for goods, and we have a free movement of labor, and that means that our farmers must compete in quite unfortunate conditions. So today I will be able to bring quite good news to our family farmers, that the Commissioner expressed such a great support for family farms. But now I want to ask, will I be able to bring some good news for all farmers? Will the Commissioner express some support for convergence of direct payments? Thank you.
Thank you. Right.
I'd hate to kill this lady with 2 pieces of good news in one day.
Oh, go on. You can be Father Christmas today. Go on.
The answer to the question is that I'm in favor of convergence. I have to get, of course, the co-legislators and the budgetary arithmetic will decide how far we can go.
Well, how far do you think you can go?
It depends on the budget. I don't know it yet.
Well, the lady's come all the way from Lithuania. Give her a clue.
I'm in favor of convergence.
Well, yeah, she knows that bit. She now would like some substance.
Well, I'll give you the phone number for Mr. Oettinger, and you can ring him. I'd like to know as well.
Well, ma'am, I'm sorry, he's not going to give you any more than that, but I guess that's something. Right, who's got, my gentleman there has very proudly already got his microphone, so he better have a go. Yeah, go on, sir.
Thank you, Joe Healy from the Irish Farmers Association. Just 2 quick points on the food chain and CAP. And the first real problem with farmers is income. And that's mainly driven by the breakdown in the food chain of the farmer getting 21% while the retailer gets 51%. The Commissioner mentioned it in his opening address, and the work that he has done is very welcome, but we need that work to be built on now, and the work of the Agri-Markets Task Force to ensure that there's a closing of that gap between the farmer and the retailer from the 21% to the 51%. The second one is the CAP. An EU survey recently showed that 90% of people don't fully understand the CAP. 1 in 3 never heard of it. I think it's taken for granted, despite the fact that it has been so successful. In the 1960s, when it was introduced, 30% of the average household income was being spent on food. Today, that's between 9 and 12%. It has allowed farmers to produce an adequate supply of safe food, ensure best animal welfare practices.
This is all very interesting, but I'm a bit worried you're reading it like a speech.
No, but what I'm getting to is what...
Well, get there quick, come on.
Others talk, and enhance the environment, others talk about those 3 areas. Farmers do them every day. A strongly budgeted CAP, properly structured, going to right farmers, and as you said, with the right policies behind it, is vital into the future to sustain farmers, the environment, and safe food for our consumers. Thank you.
Right, okay. Well, that did sound dangerously like a speech, a very good one, but a speech. But your fellow countryman, the Commissioner, what are you going to do about these stats which suggest that, you know, farmers getting a really raw deal compared with the other stakeholders in the sort of food chain, or whatever one calls it?
Yeah, they are getting a very raw deal, and the evidence is there.
Well, that's your failing then, isn't it?
Well, I haven't failed yet, because nobody has ever tried to do something about it until I came along.
Ah.
And on the 12th of April, we'll be publishing proposals that will give effect to what Mr. Healy has asked. We will be stamping out unfair trading practices and providing greater transparency in pricing and greater coordination to the actions that are already taken in member states to improve the position of the farmer vis-à-vis processors and retailers.
All right, I just want to get a different perspective on this, and then we'll get back to questions. But Ariel, you know, you speak from a very different perspective, looking at sort of safeguarding, well, in your case, bird life, but obviously an environmental angle on all this. Do you think farmers get a very raw deal?
They often do, but I think it's really important, if you want to move this debate forward, to stop talking about, you know, the farmers as if they were some sort of blob. I mean, like, those are real people, real entrepreneurs, and there are good ones and bad ones, some that make money, some that lose money. And the question is, what are we giving them to support them? So what I would want to see in the new CAP are essentially 2 things. One is the sort of environmental payments that have been rolled down back heavily,
right,
which, by the way, do stabilize income, because your market fluctuates, but your long-term environmental delivery contract stays stable, so it does help. And I want to see investment in helping farmers go from where they are today to where they need to be tomorrow. Okay. What we do have today is mostly money for nothing. People that happen to get a check because someone in 2000 used to grow something and they have an entitlement, which is no way to spend money, even less when you have fewer of that money. And the other thing that we are seeing is a return of production subsidies, where we have a crisis in the milk sector, and all countries but 2 have been bringing in new subsidies for milk production. And what do you think that does to the milk price, and what do you think does that do to the viability of milk farmers?
I got you. Powerful statement, thank you very much. We're going to squeeze in as many more questions as we can. Well, you're all brandishing microphones like you've got a new toy, so I suppose we better hear from you. But you've got to be really quick, because we're almost out of time. You, ma'am, first.
Can you hear me? Okay. Brazilian Confederation of Agriculture and Livestock. I just wanted to offer some consolation to Ariel. to Ariane.
Ariane,
We in Brazil, our policy for how we should produce and what we should preserve comes from the environmental policy. So you can imagine that we have to preserve, if we have a farm in the Amazon, we have to preserve 80% of the farm. In other areas, 20 or 35, and we don't get €1 by doing so. But this is another issue. I would like to ask you if you see good opportunities to export European products to Mercosur with the trade agreement in negotiation, and not only see like European market for Europeans, but also looking globally and seeing the other opportunities. Thank you.
Was that for Ariana?
Whoever wants to answer.
Go on then.
Yep.
Quick, Ariana, if you would.
Absolutely. I do absolutely believe in the opportunities in international trade, and I think that's one of the main reasons actually for arguing for leadership at the European level on the cap, because we're talking about European and international markets to help through and deal with market volatility. And so I think that's one of the main arguments for actually keeping more of the cap at the European level.
Right, we're going to try and squeeze in a couple more. Has anybody, do you have a microphone at the back? Yes, yes, ma'am, you, because I promised you. Go on.
Hello, my name is Gabriela Cruz. I'm a farmer in Portugal, and I represent the Conservation Agriculture Association of Portugal. I would like to ask to the panelists who are not farmers a very simple question. If you were a farmer, if you were farmers, what would you like CAP to be in order to maintain you in the business, in your farm, and farming in your region and in your country? Thank you.
Okay, well, I think probably we'll have Jean and then Commissioner Hogan give very quick answers to that. I mean, you're a politician, you're not a farmer.
No,
but
I am elected in a rural area in France. We have to encourage investment for innovation, for competitiveness. We have to support this kind of investment. We have to encourage a group of producers and facilitate to increase the power in the negotiation with agro-industry and with the distribution. And as I said, CAP is not only a question of funding, of public funding. CAP is also a coherence, that means a simplification of the grants delivery. And we have to define at the European level a strategy for free trade negotiations, and make sure that we don't bring in a disaster some farmers due to imports at very low prices. And
so trade policy is a part of this, obviously.
And we have to change the law concerning the competitiveness and to facilitate the association of producers to negotiate.
Jean, I'm sorry to cut you off, but we're in the red zone for time, and I want a last word on that thought. You know, if you were a farmer as opposed to a highly paid commissioner, what would you regard as the priorities for the new CAP?
What are you paid yourself?
Not as much as a commissioner.
Make a declaration here now.
Not as much as a commissioner. I don't know why I threw that red herring in. Just answer the question.
Yes, my actually salary is public. But what I would say to the lady from Portugal, who have had a very difficult time in 2017 with drought and with very difficult conditions, if you could have the conditions that you could farm with some stability, if you had a market locally or internationally that you can be able to sell your products, well, then you would feel very much, I'd say, comfortable in the existence that you have, been able to have the tools that are necessary to have a very rewarding and good standard of life. But this is not the way farmers are. And we have to fine-tune our tools in policy terms on risk management to be able to overcome these various risks that you have to endure, that nobody else like me have to endure, in all risks and all weathers, in order to help you to make a living and to be able to stay doing not just the issues around food security, but doing all the public goods that we're going to ask you to do, as well as what you're doing today, and pay you well for it, like all professionals.
Excellent. Well, I thank you, Commissioner Hogan, and I thank all of my panel. I knew this would be a compelling debate, and it has proved to be just that. It's been fascinating. Who knew that the cap could be so interesting? But there you go. I'm now going to invite you all to give a very warm hand to my panel and invite them to very elegantly depart the stage. Thank you very much. Thanks.